Brought to you by Penguin.
Hitler's People by Richard J. Evans. Read by Leighton Pugh. In Memoriam John Dixon Walsh, 1927 to 2022, who taught me history. Preface. Who were the Nazis? What motivated the leaders and functionaries of the Nazi movement, and those who put their project into action? What had happened to their moral compass? Were they in some sense deviant or deranged or degenerate? Were they gangsters acting with criminal intent? Or were they ordinary men, and a few women? Or perhaps, more precisely, ordinary Germans? Did they come from the margins of society? Were they outsiders? Or were they in some sense part of German society's mainstream? And how do we explain Hitler's drive to achieve dictatorial power? Was he a kind of empty shell, devoid of personal qualities and without a personal life, into which Germans poured their deepest political ambitions and desires? What made otherwise normal people carry out or approve terrible and murderous atrocities against Nazism's real and supposed enemies? Or were they perhaps not normal at all? Beyond this, why did so many leading Germans in responsible positions, in the key institutions of society, go along with dictatorship, war and genocide? And what did those of them who survived the war think about their conduct under the Third Reich? Did they gain a moral perspective on it? Did they repent? Did they come to an understanding of what they had done? These questions are at the heart of the present book, and in the past few years they have gained new urgency and importance. For since shortly after the beginning of the 21st century, democratic institutions have been under threat in many countries across the world. Strong men and would-be dictators are emerging, often with considerable popular support, to undermine democracy, muzzle the media, control the judiciary, stifle opposition, and undermine basic human rights. Political corruption, lies, dishonesty, and deceit are becoming the new currency of politics, with fatal results for our fundamental freedoms. Hatred and persecution of minorities are on the increase, stoked by unscrupulous politicians. The future is bleak, the prospects for freedom and democracy uncertain. How do we explain the rise and triumph of tyrants and charlatans? What causes someone to be gripped by a lust for power and domination? Why do such men, and they are almost always men, manage to gather round them disciples and supporters willing to carry out their commands? Is society's set of moral values so weak or so warped that their willingness to violate the conventional precepts of human decency comes to know no bounds? In this troubling situation, many people look to the past for answers to these questions. The paradigm of democracy's collapse and dictatorship's triumph remains the fate of Germany's Weimar Republic and the rise of the Nazis. Hitler and his circle have been understood in many different ways: as a group of psychopaths, a gang of criminals, a collection of outsiders, even a modern version of the most deranged and destructive emperors of ancient Rome and their courts. Not infrequently they have been described as insane, or at least psychologically disturbed in some way. This book takes a close look at the people who overthrew the fragile democracy of the Weimar Republic, set up the Third Reich, kept it in power for over a decade, and drove it into war, genocide, and self-destruction. Only by examining individual personalities and their stories can we reach an understanding of the perverted morality that made and sustained the Nazi regime, and by doing so, perhaps learn some lessons for the troubled era in which we live.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?